Hello. I'm glad you're able to join me today. You know, I started these classes some time back when we started having the COVID crisis come along, and I wanted to have some way to stay connected with everyone. And I want to continue to try to stay connected, but hopefully we're getting towards the end of this crisis that we're part of. You might notice I'm wearing a short sleeve shirt today. This is not because it's a warm day here in Oregon. It's because I'm going to go have my vaccination today and I have to wear a short sleeve shirt. And so I hope you're doing all right. I hope we're getting through this together and doing all right. I know some families have been greatly affected. And just pray that we've all gotten through this, though, in doing all right. And especially the church here in Oregon City seems to have come through pretty well. And let us know how you're doing. Leave us a note here telling us how things have been going for you. Well, I've been having this class on telling yourself the truth. I've just been beating this thought, this theme over and over like beating a drum. The idea is that what we tell ourselves, what our mindset is, has tremendous consequences. It has consequences on our behavior and on our feelings, how we think, what we're telling ourselves. And so it's important for us to tell ourselves the truth. The problem is that oftentimes there's a big difference between what we think, what we tell ourselves, our self-talk, and reality. And when there's a difference between what we think and reality, then there's going to be problems. And we have all kinds of problems. We have the problem of anger and fear and discouragement. And all these things happen because our self-talk tries to convince us that something different is happening than what is reality. Now, the Bible speaks of two worldviews and two mindsets. There is the materialistic mindset of the materialist. They have a mindset that sets itself on the flesh. And then there's the Christian mindset that sets its mind on the spirit, the spiritual thing. And we focus on God. And these things are important because the way we think leads us to these worldviews. They lead us to these mindsets. I want to recommend a book to you today that I've enjoyed. It is by Nancy Pearcey. It's called Love Thy Body. Nancy Pearcey is an academic. She's a professor at a university in Texas. This lady's really sharp. I mean, she's really smart. And I appreciate the things she says here in this book. And she says there's actually two purposes, two reasons for writing the book. One of the reasons is to help us Christians understand the world view that is behind most hot button issues today. And so we'll understand what's going on. Sometimes we're confused how people can think this way. Well, it's because of their worldview. And the second reason, the second purpose, is to help us as Christians to articulate a Christian mindset. Too often when Christians give their position, the secularists don't look at it and say, well, are Christians telling the truth? They just say, well, why are Christians so bigoted? We need to be able to say in a loving fashion, in a concise way, what we believe, and to let people know what we believe is based on truth. Truth is so vital and so important to Christianity. What we have today, what we see today, is not different than what was going on in the first century. In the first century, they were influenced by a lot of Greek philosophy. There was Gnosticism, Platonianism, and what these philosophies had was a dualism. There was a dualistic way of thinking that the flesh, the body, was evil and the mind was good. That the body must have been made by some evil god. And in the philosophy of the Greeks, there were a lot of gods. And so the body was created by an evil god. And the ultimate goal of Greek philosophy was to free yourself of the body. That was salvation to them, was to escape the body, escape the flesh. And so Christianity was actually revolutionary. What Christianity was saying is that the flesh, our bodies, were created by not an evil God, but by a good God. It was created by a good God to be good. That our bodies can be good. Jesus became flesh, and he dwelt among us. He became flesh, and he died and was buried, and then he was resurrected. He actually accomplished what the Greek thought that he should accomplish, that he was separated from the body. But what he does is he comes back to that physical body. That's the concept of resurrection. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians that this idea, 1 Corinthians 1:23, this idea to the Greeks of the cross and the resurrection was just foolishness, because why would we want to come back to the flesh? But there's a very fleshly orientation in Christianity, a very physical orientation, I should say. We're looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth. And so our bodies are going to be resurrected. We will have a resurrected body, a regenerated body. It'll be different than this body. We don't know yet what it'll look like, but when we see Jesus, it will look like his. And so this Greek influence in the first century actually had some influence on Christianity too, that they were trying to fight. One of the key problems in Christianity was asceticism. We still have that same problem today, I think. Ascetics, trying to punish the body, trying to be harsh on the body, and thinking of the body as being shameful, or being worthless, or being unimportant. And the greatest sin of all in this mindset was sex. And what Christianity does is elevates the body. It causes us to rethink this whole aspect of ascetics and this Greek philosophy of dualism. In 1 Corinthians, the 6th chapter, verses 19 and 20, it says, "Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and that you are not your own? For you've been bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body." Our bodies are not evil at all, but our bodies are the actual temple of God. God can live within our bodies, in our temple. We believe the Holy Spirit is God dwelling in us as Christians. And we elevate the body. We don't say that flesh is evil. The Greeks had a hard time grasping the idea of Jesus becoming flesh, because for them this is a concept of evil. But Jesus identifies where evil comes from. And it's not the flesh at all. It's not the body at all. In fact, in 1 Corinthians, the 15th chapter, verses 18 and 19, Jesus talks about where evil comes from. He says here, "For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, slanders. These are the things which defile the man. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile the man." It's not what we put in our mouth that defiles us, is what he's saying. Not what we eat is what defiles us, but what comes out of the heart is what defiles us. What's going on in our mind, our thoughts, are what defiles us. Our hearts, he says, are what's behind murders and adulteries and fornications and theft and false witnesses. All these terrible sins are caused by a way that we think. And so we have these two mindsets then. There's this atheistic, secular, materialistic mindset, and then there's this mindset that Christians have, which focuses on the spiritual, it focuses on God. Now, when you take a look at the secular materialist, this atheistic, science-oriented mindset, biology for them is just a cosmic accident. The body is just a product of blind chance. There's no higher meaning or no higher purpose in the body. It's just the result of evolutionary change over millions and billions of years. And so there's really no purpose in the body at all. And therefore, you have this dualism, the same dualism we see in Greek philosophy. This dualism says that the body might be defined by science, but the purpose of the body is going to be defined by the thought process of the person. The person what is real, what is authentic, is defined by the mind. So you have this dualism between body and mind, where the body is, well, it can be defined by science, it can be whatever it is, but it's nothing until the mind tells it what it is. And this is the philosophy of our culture today, this dualism. Things like morality, theology, these are private, these are personal, these are subjective things that can be defined by the way we think. We define what's right and what's wrong by what we think is right and what is wrong. If you think it's right for you. If you think it's wrong for you. And so we put a lot of emphasis on the individual's ability to decide for themselves what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is evil, and what the body should be used for. Now, one of the examples that I want to give to start with is the example of abortion. And by the way, Nancy Pearcey spends a lot of time in these hot button issues. She talks about abortion, euthanasia, homosexuality, transsexualism, the sexualization, this easy sexualization from people just hopping around from bed to bed with one another. She talks about a lot of these in detail, and I don't have time in this forum to go into detail, so I would recommend getting the book. Like I say, she does an excellent job. But she lays a foundation for us to help us understand. Christians often don't understand how it is that the secularist will say, well, you can abort your baby up until the day before it's born. You have now in some states, in some places, that you can have an abortion up to 9 months. And we are confused because Christians spend a lot of time, we have spent a lot of effort and a lot of energy proving that a fetus is a baby, that a fetus and a baby is human. And the evidence is overwhelming. It is a human. In fact, virtually everyone agrees. The materialist and the Christian agrees on one thing. Yeah, this is a baby. This is a human. The baby in the womb is biologically, physiologically, genetically human. For Christians, that's the end of the debate. But for the secularist, you see, the materialist has this separation of the body to the mind. It's the mind that determines what the body is. And so you have personhood theory, and which has far-reaching consequences. Mention just one of those in just a moment. But personhood theory asks, is the human body really a person? And so you might have a human body in the womb, but the question is it a person? And the only one who has the right to decide whether it is a person or not in our current culture is the mother. The mother can deem it so. It's her choice whether or not this baby in her is a person or not. The body has no purpose. It has no design unless it's deemed to have purpose and design by the mother. We talk about free to choose. That's the thing. You have the anti-abortions, and those on the other side say, well, no, you're free to choose. What they mean by being free to choose is the mother gets to choose whether or not this is a person or not. It's not whether or not this is a baby. We all agree it's a baby. We all agree that it's a human. It's whether or not it's a person. Now, what qualifies someone as a person? Well, that's a complex thing today. Even bioethicists all have a differing view on what makes a human a person. What if it has a genetic defect? What if it has Down syndrome? What if it has a club foot? What if it's a girl? That might sound strange, but more abortions happen for sexual reasons because people want a boy and not a girl around the world. That happens more often than any other reason. So who's to decide what makes this a person or not? and what disqualifies this baby as a person. And what happens is when somebody in power, like the mother, or when government can decide, well, then the weak are going to be exploited and they're going to be killed. The history of American slavery, the history of World War II Holocaust, tells us what happens when people can decide whether someone else is less human than they are. When someone else can decide that this is not really a person. When you can say a black man is not a person, a black person is not a person, when you can say a Jewish person is not a person, well, then you're going to end up with the weak being exploited and killed. In Exodus, the first chapter, it's an interesting thing because the Jews experienced this in Egypt. In Exodus, the first chapter, and for Christians who know their Bible pretty well, this is pretty familiar to you. You remember this. Exodus 1:15 and following, it says, "Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other was named Puah. And he said, when you are helping the Hebrew women to give birth and see them upon the birth stool, if it's a son, then you shall put him to death. But if it's a daughter, then she shall live." You see, the king of Egypt was deciding whether this was a person worth living or not. Well, if it's a girl, he can have life. If it was a boy, he seen a boy as somebody of a future problem, somebody who could raise up and challenge his power. And so infanticide, this is not really a person. And so the question for us today is, who is going to stand up? Who's going to speak up for the voiceless? Who is going to speak up for the unborn? Who is going to speak up and say, this is a person because it is a human? The body is not evil. The body is not a thing. The body is a person. This is not just, we talk about this in such sterile terminology sometimes. It's not sterile at all. This is part of life. This is part of family. We give birth. We beget children. And they start in the womb. In the book of Psalms, David has some interesting words. In Psalm 139, in verse 13, he says, "For you formed my inward parts, you wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them." David saying, I was a person before I was born. God could see me being formed in my mother's womb. He knew who I was going to become. He knew the number of days I would have. Jesus himself was at one point a baby. He was at one point an unborn child. So this dualism is what we're dealing with. This dualism. So you have what is real, what is scientific, what is objective, and then above that, the dualism says, well, no, but this can all be overruled by subjective thinking. We might have a body, but it's only what it is because we think of what it is. This dualism is happening here. Abortion is anti-scientific. It's anti-science because it says it doesn't matter what science says. It doesn't matter what the body really is. It only matters what we think it is. This has such far-reaching consequences. It really does, and I'm not going to go into some of this. I'll just mention one of them right now, and that is euthanasia. My mother-in-law, for instance, she has dementia, and she's had it for a number of years, and this once vibrant, very intelligent, life-affirming person now doesn't even recognize who her daughter is. It's so sad to see She's a shell of her former self. What happens when someone has to decide whether she's a person or not? And who gets to decide that? You see, there should be a respect for her humanity. She is a person. She is a human. She has a body. She has a spirit. She has breath. But you see, the far-reaching effects of dualism allows us to make choices for other people. And they're usually choices of convenience for us. On the other hand, Christianity is a holistic approach to life. It sees the body and the spirit together. You cannot redefine the body. You cannot separate it from truth. You cannot redefine the mind and separate that from truth. It's a holistic approach to the body. It looks at all these things together. Sometimes we speak of Christianity as being traditional. Christians are traditional, and this we're doing in our culture today, the society today, this is really what's new. It's not new at all. In fact, it's Christianity that's revolutionary. It's because what's happening today is the same thing that happened in the first century. First century Christians dealt with this for a long time in the Roman Empire. They were so counterculture, and we need to be called to be counterculture today. I was interested in this one section by Nancy Pearcey of some of the quotations of the early church fathers who stood up against abortion and infanticide, because these were widely accepted and practiced. And she says that in the Didache, which is a text written between 50 and 120 A.D., it says, "Do not murder a child by abortion, nor kill it at birth." The 2nd century epistle of Barnabas says, "You shall not slay a child by abortion." Justin Martyr wrote, "We have been taught that it is wicked to expose even newly born children, for we would then be murderers." Athenagoras wrote, "We say that women who use drugs to bring on an abortion commit murder, for we regard the very fetus in the womb as a created being and therefore an object of God's care." In the 3rd century, Tertullian wrote, "It does not matter whether you take away a life that is born or destroy one that is coming to the birth. In both instances, destruction is murder." In the 4th century, Basil of Caesarea wrote, "A woman who deliberately destroys a fetus is answerable for murder." John Chrysostom wrote, "Why do you abuse the gift of God and make the chamber of procreation a chamber for murder?" Jerome called abortion the murder of an unborn child. Augustine warned against the terrible crime of the murder of an unborn child. What you see in these statements is Christians rising up in a countercultural way and standing up for the rights of those who are voiceless, standing up for the rights of unborn babies and infants. Because often then, if they didn't abort the babies, they would just take the baby if they didn't like it, or if they had a defect, if they didn't feel it was one that they wanted, they would just go and expose the baby and leave them out somewhere in a field until they died. Abortion expresses the lowest view of the body. And more than this, it is so disrespectful of women's bodies as well. And I don't have enough time to talk about that. I've recommended you get Nancy Pearcey's book. She talks about the way that this, really, it really has a disrespectful expression towards female bodies and what women were created for. And so have the courage to tell yourself the truth. We've seen in this smaller ways how depression and fear and worry, all these things that we deal with every day are based upon the way we think and our self-talk. But sometimes the way we talk to ourselves is based on a bigger worldview that causes even greater issues. And so Christians, you need to know this. You need to understand the dualism. You need to understand why people today feel like they can abort a baby at 9 months. And you need to be able to express the dualism and the holistic approach of Christians so we don't just look like a bunch of bigots. So that we say it lovingly, we need to speak up for the unborn. We need to speak up for the helpless and the weak. We need to have social justice here. We need to elevate the concept of the mother's womb, the uniqueness of women to be able to carry a baby. Well, there's much more I could say, obviously, and there's so much to say in this whole topic, and I just wanted to introduce it to you and recommend this book. I hope you have a great week. I hope that we're one step on getting back together in the building as a church and being able to visit with one another and eradicating this virus that's been so devastating to us all. Anyway, you have a great week, and may God bless you all.